Joe Biden's entire career has been the career of a cold warrior. People should remember Delaware is the state which has the most pro-corporate laws of any one of the states in the United States, which is why most large corporations are registered in the state of Delaware, simply because they're free to do pretty much what they want. If you're the senator from corporate America, then you better hold the line. You better do what the corporations want, or you'll be out of there in 10 minutes. And he's a little bit like that cartoon duck character, the one that runs off the cliff and doesn't realize it. There's no more cliff under him until he looks down and then boom. He hasn't looked down yet, Mr. Biden. Maybe he never will. But he is that duck. He's fighting the Cold War, even though the Cold War is over. He wants to ratchet up the sanctions because there's nothing against the Soviet Union he didn't enjoy doing. And the fact that there is no Soviet Union, that Mr. Putin is the rejection of the Soviet Union, hasn't yet computed in Mr. Biden's mind. Maybe that's an aging problem, I don't know. But he's busy doing this weird stuff of blocking the Europeans from getting oil and gas from Russia. Russia has, because it's the largest country by geography on this planet, it has discovered that underneath the surface of the earth that it occupies, there are lots and lots of valuable metals, minerals, oil, gas, and everything else. So they became, over the last 30 years, the cheapest nearby source of oil and gas for Western Europe. Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Britain, you name it. Okay, those parts of the world lost their colonies. After World War II, from India to Africa to Latin America, poor countries exploited as colonies by Britain or France or Belgium or England. Those colonies revolted and they fought and they became independent. And that meant that Europe couldn't get the cheap oil and gas it used to get from them. But it was okay. It survived because it depends on energy. Europe is an area that has very little oil and gas. But they were able to continue to be a rich part of the world because they could buy cheap oil and gas from Russia. When the United States decided to have a war with Russia over Ukraine, after Russia invaded and the United States responded, it decided it was too dangerous to fight the war with military means. Then there was the risk of nuclear war because Russia has nuclear weapons. So they decided to fight an economic war. They would hit Russia with the biggest weapon they had, which is to say to them, we won't buy anymore your cheap oil and your cheap gas. Now, it was very nice for the United States to say so, but we don't buy Russian oil and gas, so it wasn't no big deal for us. But it was a catastrophe for our bosom buddy allies. And above all, the single most important economy in Europe, which is the economy of Germany. Germany has been the dynamic core, the successful economy in Western Europe for most of the last 30 to 40 years. And they depended more than Britain, more than France, on cheap oil and gas from Russia. So what you did here in the United States, you, Mr. Biden, by deciding to hit Russia with this oil and gas sanction, was you crippled Germany. Let me give you an example. The single most important product that the Germans produce is automobiles and parts for automobiles. That's where the Volkswagen, the VW, that's where it comes from. Right now, as we're speaking, VW is on strike. 125,000 workers are not working in Germany. The company is demanding a 10% cut in wages and proposing to close 3 out of the 9 factories that VW has in Germany. It is an unbelievable blow to the working class of that country. Okay, why? Answer: it can't get energy cheap. It has to turn to the United States and buy liquefied natural gas from the United States at a much higher price than they used to get oil and gas from Russia. So, bottom line, Russia turned out to giggle about all of this. It didn't hurt them. Why? They simply turned, and the gas and oil they couldn't sell in Western Europe, they sold to India and China, who took it all. We, in the process, brought India, China, and Russia together. They are not friends of the United States. And we crippled our allies. This is called a foreign policy too stupid for words. It may allow Mr. Biden to, I'm hitting the Russians, and that may be good for the evening news. But if you know what's going on, this is a fabulous failure. And no matter what happens to the BRICS, whether we are friends with the BRICS or not, whether the BRICS develop their own currency, which they're trying to do, or they don't, whether they try to keep friendly with the West, which some of them certainly want to do, in the end, none of that matters, because what's driving the world economy today is a fundamental fact that's not changed by any of those things. After World War II, the United States emerged as the top dog in the world economy. Why? Because World War II destroyed Britain, France, Germany, Japan. Other than Pearl Harbor at the very beginning of the war, no bombs fell in the United States. No railroad tracks were blown away. No factories were blown away. Compared to what all of those other countries suffered in the way of destruction of their economies, we didn't have it. In fact, we got stronger because what happened before World War II was the Great Depression. The war overcame the Depression. We took half the people who were unemployed and stuck them in a uniform, and we took the other half of the people who were unemployed and put them in work in the factories making the uniform. So we really built out of the Great Depression by means of the war, whereas for all those other countries, the war added more destruction to what the Depression had already done. So starting in 1945, we're it. The U.S. dollar is the global currency. The old previous empire, the British Empire, basically fell into the ocean and has never come back. We took over. Now here's the punchline. The period of the American empire is now over. And it is not coming back any more than the British Empire or the Dutch Empire or the Turkish Empire that came and that went, and none of them came back either. That's what we're living through, and it's very hard. I'm an American. I'm born in Ohio, lived and worked here all my life. So I understand it's hard for us as a people, just as it was hard for the British people to live through the end of their empire. It may have been good news for Asia and Africa that got out from under the British Empire. But for the British, it wasn't such good news. It isn't such good news for us either. But we have really only one choice. Are we going to come to terms with it? Are we going to sit down with the Chinese and the Indians and the African and come to terms on a new world order, one which is not dominated by the United States? That world order is coming. BRICS is part of that. We're not going to be able to stop it, and Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump are going to be very frustrated because they're not going to do it. Their only hope is to face it, talk honestly to the American people, and come up with a plan of how to sit down with the rising part of the world, which is the BRICS. That's our best hope. And that makes me very sad because we just went through a presidential election in which neither Mr. Trump nor Mr. Biden nor sadly Kamala Harris addressed this fact, told us what they're going to propose we do in the face of all of this. Instead of this, we play silly games. Psychologists call this denial. It's when you have a problem, but instead of dealing with it, you pretend it isn't there. You know how that works out when you have a love affair that's not there anymore? That doesn't work out real well. Same thing. Russia had, at the time of the Ukraine invasion, something on the order of $300 billion of assets deposited, because Russia does a lot of business with the Western world. It had that money deposited partly to do that business and partly as a reserve against the ruble. The United States and the Allies, frustrated that they could not punish Russia the way they had hoped, took the money, froze it in a special account that the Russians could not take. The Russians were denied access to their private property. And when the United States and the Allies did that, a lot of the biggest banks in America said, hey, stop that. Because in the end, we in America are the beneficiary of private property being respected in the world because we have most of it. We're just like a rich person doesn't want you to tax rich people because they're the rich people. And they said to the United States, this war is one of many wars. It's going to last a few years, then it's going to be over. You don't want to shake the foundation of our private wealth system in the world for a temporary. The government didn't listen. The politicians were eager to show they're sticking it to the Russians. That's Mr. Biden again. And that's what he did. They're still worried about what they did. The banks are still telling these governments, don't do it. Some of them want to take the $300 billion and give it to Ukraine to help the Ukraine rebuild from all the damage going on in that war. Since the world, by the way, is fighting a war to the last Ukrainian, not to the Russians or not to the Americans. So here's the compromise. They're taking the interest because the $300 billion, while it sits there, earns interest. Well, let's suppose it earns 4% a year. If you have $300 billion, that's $12 billion a year. The war in Ukraine has been going on for 3 years. That's $30+ billion. The enormous amount of money. They have decided to give the interest on that to the Ukrainians, which they did last week. But this is going to come back and haunt the United States. And here's why. Every country in the world, without exception, is now having meetings at the highest level. And I even include France and Italy and Germany. And at their meeting, here's what they are saying to each other. We've got a lot of money deposited in American banks. What happens if they have a government like Mr. Trump who decides he don't like us? Is he going to take our money too? And you know what they're doing? Slowly, quietly, below the radar, they are moving money out of the United States, because that's how you make sure that the United States doesn't do to you what it just showed it's willing to do to Russia. And by the way, the same decision is being made by large corporations who used to keep all kinds of money here because the United States was considered the safest place for rich people to keep money on this earth. They don't believe that anymore. That's part of the decline of our empire. And that's a little decision by a little company who used to keep $50,000 in an account in New York City. They're going to take 25 of it and put it in an account in Spain or in the Netherlands or somewhere. And little by little, the United States economy is shrinking. And that's what happens to empire. It isn't all one big dramatic event. It's lots of little events that build up, and then you have the big event. That's where we are. Look, every country has a problem. They want to deal with the rest of the world. They want to sell products. They want to buy products. And in order to do that, they have to use a currency, whichever the currency is they have. But people won't use their currency unless they're confident that that currency is valuable, right? I'm not going to sell you a bag of potatoes for $1 if I can't be sure that I can turn that dollar around and spend it on something I need, all right? So I have to believe that the value of your dollar that you give me is secure. So every country holds in reserve something of value to say to the world, if you ever don't want to use my currency, come to me, I'll give you, and here's what they hold: gold, and the dollar, which is considered to be as good as gold. In the 19th and 20th centuries, many countries held the pound sterling, that is the British currency, for the same reason. When you point out, and you're quite correct, that the reserves held by central banks around the country were 70% dollar 25 years ago and are only about 50% dollars now, there you have it. There people have shown you, voting with their dollars, that they don't believe the United States is a secure way to hold their wealth. That's an incredible comment on how the world is changing. To not face that, to not ask publicly, what does that mean and what do we do about it? That's the denial I'm talking about. That's the pretending that you don't have a problem when it's just going to make your problem worse.